Hi again. Kenneth Scott Latourette. History of Christianity, Chapter 11, is entitled The Byzantine Continuation. Now he goes back a little bit to show the development of the Byzantine, or eastern portion of the church, and how it assumed ascendancy in the period of the rise of the papacy, and at the same time the rise of Islam in the Middle East. As we have suggested, it seems fitting that in carrying our story into the period which follows the first 500 years, we should begin with that portion of the narrative which centers about Constantinople, and which leads into an account of what may be designated as the Greek or Byzantine segment of Christianity. It was through the administrative structure which had its headquarters at Constantinople that the Roman Empire persisted without a break. Through it, accordingly, the relationship between church and state, which at its inception under Constantine, continued its most characteristic development. We have seen that Christianity had its first extensive spread in the Hellenistic, Greek-using elements in the Mediterranean world. It was through Greek that all of the early Christian writings incorporated in the New Testament were given their permanent and authoritative form. Greek was the language of most of the oldest leaders in Christian thought. In the course of the centuries with which this chapter is to deal, Greek became the prevailing language of that continuation of the Roman Empire, which dominated by Constantinople let me read that sentence again. In the course of the centuries with which this chapter is to deal, Greek became the prevailing language of that continuation of the Roman Empire, which, dominated by Constantinople, is usually called Byzantine, from Byzantium, the pre-Constantinian designation of that city. Through extensive geographic expansion in subsequent centuries, this Greek or Byzantine Christianity was to become the faith of the majority in Eastern Europe and the Balkan Peninsula, and as such was to remain one of the numerically major forms of Christianity. Now he has a subhead, the Justinian era. The decline of the Roman Empire, which had been so marked in the 5th century, seemed to be halted in the 6th century, and for a brief time that realm flowered again. The central figure in the revival was the Emperor Justinian I, who reigned from 527 to 565, dying in his 80s. A nephew of his predecessor, Justin I, an Illyrian peasant who had come to Constantinople in his youth to seek his fortune, and had risen to the throne in 518 at the age of 66. Justinian had been the real power during much of his uncle's tenure of the high office. Justinian was highly intelligent, enormously hard-working, paying great attention to details, friendly, usually in control of his temper, but vain, autocratic, ambitious, sometimes vacillating, temperate in his private life almost to asceticism, and deeply religious. He cherished the dream of restoring the Roman domains to their former extent and of bringing unity to the church. This last he sought to achieve by obtaining the triumph of the Orthodox faith of Chalcedon over its rivals, especially the Arian Christianity held by many of the Germanic invaders and the varied kinds of Monophysitism or Physitism. Thanks very largely to able generals during the reign of Justinian, Italy, North Africa, and part of Spain were brought back under Roman, or perhaps we should now say Byzantine rule. Wars were waged against the chronic enemy, Persia. Under Justinian, this revived Roman Empire was probably the mightiest realm on the planet, for the period was one of decline for the major contemporary kingdom in India, that of the Gupta, and China had not yet emerged from the political division which had come upon that land in the 3rd century, and which had been aggravated by invasions from the north and west. Justinian's empress was Theodora. Theodora, like Justinian's family, was of humble origin. A contemporary, Procopius, who wrote a secret history defaming both emperor and empress, tells scandalous stories of her youth. These may have been exaggerated, but it is regarded as certain that before her union with Justinian, she had an illegitimate child. She was indisputably a woman of great resolution, charm, beauty, ability, and force. After she was raised to the throne, she seems to have remained true to Justinian, who in turn was devoted to her. The two differed religiously, for while Justinian was staunch in his Chalcedonian orthodoxy, Theodora was a warm supporter of the Monophysites. She was energetic in redressing wrongs, and she is given the credit for stringent legislation suppressing the sale of girls into prostitution, and for founding a convent in which the unfortunates were given an opportunity to begin a better life. Under Justinian and Theodora, perhaps because of the latter's love of luxury and display, the imperial court took on additional pomp, and those coming into the imperial presence were required to prostrate themselves. This was in accord with the lavish ornateness which was to characterize Byzantine life, both secular and religious. It was partly in this spirit that Justinian became a great builder. At his command, towns came into being, extensive fortifications, roads, bridges, baths, and palaces were constructed, and many churches and monasteries were erected. His most famous architectural achievement was St. Sophia, the cathedral church of Constantinople. St. Sophia was the climax of a new style of architecture which made outstanding use of the dome, and which was inspired by the Christian faith and had its purpose a worthy setting for Christian worship. Justinian was deeply interested in theology. Almost inevitably, therefore, he took a leading part in the controversies which were still raging over the relation of the divine and human in Christ. We have seen how, in 482, the Emperor Zeno had attempted to compose the differences between the Chalcedonians and the Monophysites by his Henoticon. This had not brought peace, for while some Monophysites accepted it, others of them rejected it, and on the other extreme, the Pope would have none of it and excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople for being associated with it. Into all the complicated details of the disputes and the attempted settlements during the reign of Justinian, we must not take the time to go. In general, Justinian, who was no mean theologian in his own right, endeavored to bring about agreement on the basis of ostensibly holding to the decrees of Chalcedon, but slanting the latter in the direction of the views of Cyril of Alexandria. These, it will be recalled, while conceding the human element in Christ, subordinated it to the divine. Justinian seems to have hoped that by this policy he would draw together the adherents of Chalcedon and the more moderate among the Monophysites. The latter, it will be remembered, represented varying shades of theological conviction, some leaving less room for the human in Christ than others. In this effort, Justinian found support in the writings of a contemporary monk, Leo of Byzantium, who, employing Aristotelian categories, held that one could affirm two natures in Christ without going to the extreme associated with what he regarded, or what was regarded, as Nestorianism, and that while the two natures, the human and the divine, might remain, they could be regarded as so commingled and united that in Christ there would be but one hypostasis, that of the Logos. In 544, Justinian issued an edict in which, by his own fiat, he condemned three writings, or groups of writings, sometimes known not with entire accuracy as the three chapters, including those of Theodore of Mopsuestia, who had much to do with shaping the views of the two natures in Christ, which had been associated with the name of Nestorius, and had been rejected by the Catholic Church, and of a Theodorate who had come out against Cyril and in behalf of Nestorius. However, this edict, far from making for harmony, stirred up fresh dissension. In the West, some of the bishops regarded it as an iniquitous action against men who, being dead, could not defend themselves, as also a repudiation of Chalcedon, and as an endorsement of the Monophysites. The resulting controversy is known as that of the three chapters. In the ensuing struggle, the Pope Vigilius came through with a record of vacillation and self-contradiction. At first, he opposed the imperial edict and broke off communion with the Patriarch of Constantinople, who supported it. Then, arriving at Constantinople, he executed an about-face and issued a I don't know if I'm producing this correctly, but Judicatum. I guess it would be Judicatum in modern pronunciation, in which, while careful to support Chalcedon and not to concede to the emperor the right to determine matters of doctrine, he independently condemned the writings which had been anathematized in the imperial edict. The Judicatum met with sharp criticism from many bishops in Gaul, North Africa, Scythia, Dalmatia, and Illyria as compromising Chalcedon, and in 550, Vigilius withdrew it. Vigilius also reversed himself in other decisions, yet on occasion he showed courage, refused to yield to the emperor, and stood up for the authority of the papal see. More about the era of Justinian next time. Put in a link to the development of the deity of Christ, not just in the early church, although that's touched upon in the latter video, I think, of the three. So the first one's on your screen, dealing with the deity of Christ and its development even within the New Testament. 3 videos altogether, which is based upon the script derived from the document that's in the PDF section of our onewonders.org website. So if you look under the PDF archive, you'll find several dozen of the documents and booklets that were used as scripts for many of our playlists. See you next time.